Welcome to the deep dive.
Yeah.
You know, when you think about like a major security threat, you almost always picture a fortified wall.
Right. Yeah, definitely. A fortress or something.
Exactly. You imagine the danger as this highly visible external force, like an invading army or I don't know, a glaring computer
A
virus.
stranger lurking in the shadows.
Right. It's a very clean, binary way to view the world. Us versus them, inside versus outside.
Which is incredibly comforting, honestly, because if the threat is external, you have a really simple solution. You just build a higher wall.
You lock the door.
Exactly. Lock the door and you're safe.
But then, you look at history or psychology or even just modern fraud cases, and suddenly that fortified wall, it doesn't mean anything.
No, not at all.
The most devastating threats aren't trying to break the door down. They already have the key. And that is exactly what we're getting into today with the notes you sent over.
Oh, it's such a fascinating text.
It really is. So to give you all listening a quick overview, we've got this incredibly detailed Sunday school lesson. It's dated April 19th, 2026. And it's dissecting an ancient letter written by the Apostle Peter.
2 Peter specifically.
Right, 2 Peter chapter 2, verses 10 through 22, the deception of false teachers. And what's wild to me is that this reads less like, a dusty theological treatise and more like a modern psychological thriller about manipulation.
It's the absolute definition of a Trojan horse scenario. I mean, Peter is essentially writing a survival guide for early believers who are under immense pressure.
Yeah.
But he isn't warning them about Roman emperors or outside persecutors. He's warning them about a landscape of deception that is incredibly murky because the danger is sitting right at their dinner table.
Wow.
He's mapping out this timeless anatomy of how communities just get compromised from the inside out.
So I was looking at the profile Peter builds of this type of deceiver, and the defining trait isn't actually sneakiness, which is what you might expect.
Right, you think they'd be subtle.
Yeah, but it's extreme arrogance. They possess this complete lack of humility. The notes describe these individuals as presumptuous, self-willed, and, here's a fascinating phrase, they are not afraid to speak evil of dignities.
Yeah, that phrase right there, speaking evil of dignities or glories, depending on the translation, that opens up a massive window into their psychological makeup.
How so?
Well, scholars debate who these dignities actually are. Some argue it refers to, like, human church authorities. Others suggest it means angels or even fallen angels.
Okay.
And there's a strong case it refers to the Father and the Son. But honestly, the underlying behavioral pattern is the exact same regardless.
Meaning they just disrespect everyone.
Basically, yeah. These individuals are setting themselves up above all established authority, even divine authority. They recognize no hierarchy of wisdom or power other than themselves.
They essentially think they are the smartest people in the room, universally.
Always.
And to highlight how absurd this is, Peter points out that even cosmic beings show restraint, right? Like, the notes bring in a parallel from the book of Jude.
Oh, the story with Michael the Archangel.
Yes, where the archangel Michael is disputing with the devil. And even Michael, an archangel with vast power, wouldn't cross the line into slanderous, arrogant accusation.
He deferred to a higher authority.
Right. So you have literal supernatural entities exhibiting caution while these human teachers are just running their mouths, scoffing at realities they don't even comprehend.
It's a profound manifestation of the Dunning-Kruger effect, honestly.
Oh, that's a great way to put it.
But, applied to morality and spirituality, they possess this foolish lack of fear because their ignorance is so deep they literally don't realize what they don't know.
I read a brilliant little anecdote in your notes that captures this perfectly. It mentions a man who had a brain tumor.
Oh, I love this one.
And he actually wanted to instruct his surgeon on how to perform the operation.
Which requires a breathtaking level of delusion.
Nobody in their right mind does that. But it highlights how people today operate, and it perfectly parallels these deceivers. Like, we watch a 10-minute video on a topic, and suddenly we think we know more than someone with decades of study.
Exactly. And if you think you already know everything, your capacity for growth is entirely dead.
Yeah.
Without humility, you literally cannot learn.
Yeah.
And Peter takes that lack of capacity for growth and pushes it to a very harsh biological conclusion. He compares these false teachers to natural brute beasts.
Oof, that's rough.
It is. He's arguing that they are no longer operating on higher moral reasoning. They're creatures driven purely by instinct, entirely ignorant of the concepts of good and evil.
So they're just feeding their appetites.
Living solely for that, which means they're entirely predictable and ultimately on a path to self-destruction.
Okay, but wait. If someone walked into a room acting like they knew more than the surgeon, I would immediately tune them out. If these deceivers are so blatantly arrogant and instinct-driven, how are they actually building an audience? Like, why don't people just see right through them?
Well, we have to look at the power of in-group bias and the historical context of how these specific communities functioned. These individuals were operating right under the noses of the early Christians.
Oh,
They weren't, holding rival meetings across town. They were sitting in the exact same room, participating in the church's love feasts.
the early church potlucks, essentially.
Basically, yeah. These were fellowship meals that culminated in taking communion together. It was the ultimate safe space.
The most intimate, trusted gathering of the whole community.
Exactly. And when someone is inside your tribe, eating your food, using your vocabulary, your critical thinking defenses naturally lower.
You just assume a shared set of values.
You do. But Peter vividly describes these infiltrators as having eyes full of adultery and hearts trained in greed. I mean, they had essentially gone to the gym to work out their covetous practices. They were looking at the people around them not as peers, but as commodities to be consumed.
And they had a very specific target demographic, didn't they? They didn't go after the seasoned, grounded leaders who might push back. They specifically preyed on what Peter calls unstable souls.
Yes, the vulnerable.
People who were new to the faith, people who were struggling, or just not fully rooted in their beliefs yet.
They're looking for the cracks in the foundation. A new convert, someone who has just escaped a life of error, is incredibly vulnerable.
Yeah, because they're actively seeking guidance.
Right, they want a welcoming hand. So when a charismatic person from within their new trusted community reaches out, they assume it's safe. They have no idea they're dealing with a predator offering a corrupted version of reality.
The call is coming from inside the house.
Literally.
The danger is sitting in the pew right next to you.
And your notes provide a really heartbreaking modern story to illustrate this dynamic.
Yeah, the one about the young man and the single mom. Right, so there was this young man who had recently joined a church. Seemed very enthusiastic, handing out gospel tracts, all that. He meets a young single mom, invites her to the community, and introduces her to the leadership.
Seems great.
She attends for a couple of weeks, and then suddenly, she just vanishes. Stops coming entirely.
It looks, on the surface, like an evangelistic success story that just faded out.
Until the pastor's wife follows up with the young woman to see why she left. And she discovers that the young man who brought her, the one acting like this super spiritual guide, had completely dishonorable intentions.
He was using the language of faith and the cover of the church community just to prey on a vulnerable single mother.
That's sickening.
It is. And that story underscores a massive practical imperative for any community. You cannot just assume that because someone is inside the building or because they know all the right buzzwords that they are a safe person. Communities have a profound responsibility to actively protect the vulnerable, especially those who are newly seeking truth. The whole psychological mechanism of deception relies on exploiting that assumed trust.
Okay, I am genuinely stuck on something here, though.
What's that?
To explain the mechanics of how this internal corruption works on a larger scale, Peter invokes a historical blueprint from the Old Testament.
Story of Balaam.
Right, Balaam, the son of Bozor, who loved the wages of unrighteousness. But the story of Balaam features a literal talking donkey.
It does, yeah.
It feels like a bizarre children's fable. Why use this specific, unusual story as a masterclass in deception? What am I missing?
Well, you have to look past the supernatural elements to the underlying military and psychological strategy that Balaam actually employed. Balaam was a prophet for hire. King Balak of Moab was terrified of the Israelites, so he hired Balaam to place a curse on them.
A direct attack.
Right. Balaam tries, but he's repeatedly stopped by divine intervention, including that famous moment where his donkey sees an angel blocking the path and actually speaks to rebuke Balaam's madness.
Right.
Ultimately, Balaam realizes that God's protection around Israel is impenetrable from the outside. A direct external attack is never going to work.
So the fortified wall is holding,
Yeah.
the outside threat is neutralized.
Exactly. So Balaam pivots to an incredibly sinister backdoor strategy. He's greedy. He still wants that money King Balak is offering. So he realizes that if he can't destroy the Israelites from the outside, he has to get them to destroy themselves.
Oh, wow.
He advises the Moabites to send their women into the Israelite camp. They enticed the Israelite men into sexual immorality and then invited them to sacrifice to foreign idols.
So they weaponized the Israelites' own appetites against them.
It worked flawlessly. The Israelites compromised their own community from within, which brought a devastating consequence upon them. Balaam found the vulnerability not in their outer defenses, but in their internal desires.
So Peter is looking at these false teachers, infiltrating the love feasts in his own day, and saying, they running the Balaam playbook.
Precisely.
They aren't coming in with a frontal assault saying, hey, reject everything you believe. They're coming in saying, let's blur the lines a little bit. Let's introduce some immorality. Let's make compromise feel acceptable.
Yeah.
They're rotting the foundation of the community so it collapses on itself.
It's corruption by proxy, and it requires a very specific type of marketing to be successful.
That is the perfect way to phrase it.
Yeah.
Because if they're destroying the community from the inside out, they can't just walk up and ask people to ruin their own lives.
Obviously not.
They have to package it as something desirable. They have to rebrand it.
They rebrand sin as freedom.
Wow.
And Peter uses some beautifully poetic, yet utterly devastating descriptions for how this rebranding works. He calls these teachers wells without water and clouds carried with a tempest.
Those are strong images.
He says they use great swelling words of vanity to allure people through the lusts of the flesh.
Wells without water. That is such a striking psychological image. I mean, imagine trekking through a desert, dying of thirst. You see a well in the distance. It promises life, relief, freedom from the heat.
You'd give anything to get there.
Right. You invest all your energy getting there, you lower the bucket, and it hits dry dirt. They promise you an oasis, but you just get a mouthful of sand.
It's the ultimate bait and switch. They make these massive, sweeping promises, liberty, enlightenment, a life free from restrictive, old-fashioned rules. But the reality they're offering is entirely empty.
Yeah.
We see this dynamic constantly in modern affinity fraud, which your notes actually highlight with another story.
Yes, the investment expert, a guy who claimed to be a Christian, a prominent member of a church, pitches a great financial opportunity to his fellow congregation members.
Classic affinity fraud.
He offers them an easy, fast way to increase their retirement dollars. And because he is part of the group, because he speaks their language and shares their social space, his friends in the church trust him implicitly.
And tragically, it was a Ponzi scheme operating within the sanctuary. Many of those people lost their entire life savings. They were promised financial liberty, and instead, they were robbed blind by someone using their shared affinity as a weapon.
And Peter points out the profound psychological truth behind this illusion of liberty in verse 19.
Yeah.
He says, while they promise them liberty, they themselves are the servants of corruption.
Yeah.
The people offering you the shortcut are often the ones most deeply trapped.
The second half of that verse is the psychological kicker, though. He says, for of whom a man is overcome, of the same is he brought in bondage.
Right.
True freedom, as your notes underscore, requires a foundation of truth and moral clarity. These false teachers were offering an easy way out by appealing to carnal desires, telling people they didn't need to be so disciplined that they could do whatever felt good.
Just giving in to what they already wanted.
Exactly. But any teaching that diminishes accountability and appeals merely to your base instincts isn't liberation. It's a different, much heavier form of chains. You literally become a slave to your own appetites.
You trade a disciplined life for an addiction to your own desires, which honestly brings us to the ending of Peter's letter, and it takes a really dark turn.
It gets very severe.
What happens when you follow a waterless well? What is the ultimate psychological fate of someone who falls for this? Peter issues a severe warning about the point of no return.
He's addressing the specific danger of relapse. Verses 20 through 22 state that if someone escapes the pollutions of the world, if they come into the knowledge of the truth and begin to live a new life, but then allow themselves to get entangled and overcome by those old pollutions again, then the latter end is worse with them than the beginning.
Your notes point out that Peter is literally saying it would have been better for them to never have known the way of righteousness at all than to know it and then turn their backs on it.
Yeah.
That feels like a paradox, though. How could ignorance possibly be better than having known the truth?
It comes down to the hardening of the human heart and the mechanics of cognitive dissonance.
Okay, unpack that for me.
When you're ignorant, your mistakes are born of a lack of knowledge. The door to change is still open. But when you know the truth, when you have actively experienced the escape from corruption, and you consciously choose to return to the darkness.
You have to force yourself to do it.
Exactly. You have to override your own conscience to do that. The psychological callousness required to make that choice damages you fundamentally. You insulate yourself against future correction.
You build an immunity to the truth.
Yes.
And Peter drives this point home with two incredibly visceral, graphic metaphors. He pulls from Proverbs, the dog has turned to his own vomit again.
Which is just a brutal image.
And then he uses a well-known Hellenistic proverb. The sow that was washed has returned to her wallowing in the mire, or the mud. I have to admit, my reaction reading that was just, why so gross?
It's jarring on purpose.
Right. Why use such shocking, repulsive language to make a theological point?
He is intentionally trying to shock the system because he is making a profound argument about behavior modification versus actual transformation. It ties directly back to his earlier description of these people as natural brute beasts.
Oh, I see. So, like, you can take a pig out of the mud, you can scrub it clean, put a little bow on it, and place it in your living room.
Sure.
You've modified its environment and its outward appearance.
But you haven't changed its fundamental nature. The moment you open the front door, that pig is heading straight back to the deepest mud puddle it can find. Because its nature dictates its desires. A pig desires mud.
So Peter is arguing that without a true inward transformation, like a fundamental change of the heart and mind, people will inevitably revert to their base instincts.
That's exactly it.
You can learn the vocabulary of a community, you can attend the gatherings, you can modify your outward behavior to fit in.
Yeah.
But if your core nature hasn't changed, the false teachers promising freedom to indulge your old appetites will easily lure you right back to the vomit and the mud.
It's the ultimate wake-up call for his audience to examine their true spiritual state. Are they just participating in a social club, or have they actually been transformed?
Right.
Because the Trojan horse strategy only works if there is something inside of you that wants to open the gates to the enemy.
Man, we have covered a massive amount of ground today. Let's bring the pieces of this deception playbook together for you listening. We've journeyed through this ancient survival guide to map out how communities are compromised.
It's quite the blueprint.
It really is. It starts with arrogant experts who lack humility and dismiss all authority. They don't attack the fortified wall. They infiltrate trusted spaces, utilizing in-group bias to target the vulnerable.
Yeah.
They employ the Balaam blueprint, knowing they can't destroy the community directly. They entice it to destroy itself through moral compromise.
And they execute this by acting as waterless wells. They rebrand destructive habits as freedom, hooking people with empty promises of liberty. But because they're slaves to corruption themselves, they only lead their followers back into bondage, leveraging the devastating psychological callousness of relapse.
It is a profound reminder that we have to critically evaluate the voices we trust. And this is the major takeaway for you listening right now. We have to look closely at the influencers, the leaders, and the charismatic figures in our lives.
Absolutely.
Especially those who have managed to get inside our trusted circles, our workplaces, our friend groups. Are those voices offering true growth, accountability, and solid ground? Or are they promising you an oasis while handing you a mouthful of sand?
It requires constant vigilance. We have to protect the vulnerable in our circles, and we have to relentlessly check our own foundations to ensure we are pursuing actual transformation, not just behavior modification.
Which leaves us with one final provocative thought to ponder as we wrap up this deep dive. We've spent this entire time analyzing how to spot the deceivers who offer empty promises of freedom. But turn the lens around for a second. Have you ever unknowingly acted as a waterless well to someone else? Have you ever given advice to a friend that sounded freeing, easy, and culturally popular in the moment, but deep down, you knew it was just giving them permission to return to the mud?
Oh, wow. That is a deeply uncomfortable question to sit with.
It is. Until next time, keep diving deep.